tier list. Raat is a masterpiece, a horror classic, a pioneer of Indian horror cinema. Or so they say. In my case, I almost fell asleep watching Raat. Yeah, this is going to be one of those hot takes, so strap yourself in. Raat is one of the most consistently recommended films for this tier list, and without a doubt, one of the most celebrated and revered films in the genre of Indian horror. It was directed by the OG Ram Gopal Verma during his breakout years and was released in 1992 simultaneously in both the Hindi and Telugu languages, surprisingly enough. And as opposed to popular films that were genre hybrids that considered horror only as an afterthought, or worse, hijack some other genres as a means to deliver its horror, Raat stands tall and proud as a undiluted, pure, unadulterated, unapologetic horror experience, and for that alone I commend the film. In many ways, it is a pioneer of the Indian horror genre, at least in terms of mainstream cinema, and this tier list wouldn't even exist without Raat. So, thanks, Raat. That being said, let me just rip the band-aid right now and say it. I did not like Raat. However, the problem isn't the horror of Raat. The problem is everything in between. Why? Let's get into that. See, Raat has its moments. There are scenes in the film when it's firing on all cylinders and you're in absolute awe and glued to the screen on the edge of your seat. But the downtime between these horror sequences are a meandering snooze fest featuring boring characters, boring drama, zero humor, zero anything of substance until things finally pick up in the last 30 minutes or so. But by then, it's too late and you have checked out and you're most likely asleep as well, and the filmmakers seem to realize this as well, and they pack up the mystery in a minute or so, and then the film ends shortly thereafter. I know what at least some of you are thinking, that this is a problem with my ADHD addled brain being spoiled by reels and TikToks, being unable to comprehend slow burn cinema without quips and humor every minute or so. No, I disagree. I just talked about another Revathi starrer, Bhutakalam, which was barely a horror film, but the human drama, the characters and the themes of the film were engrossing to the point that even if the horror of the film was executed horribly, which is not the case, I would still sing praises about the film. Or maybe I am expecting too much from a film made in 1993. Not the case either. I ranked Manichitrathazhu, released a year after Raat, in part 1 of my tier list, in the peak tier. See, that is a movie that holds up even today. So much so that even after 3 decades after its release, we are still getting remakes. All the top rated films in my tier list are in Malayalam. Could this just be me being preferential to Malayalam cinema because I am a Malayali myself? Once again, referring back to part 1 of my tier list, Sumathi Valavu is the only film so far that has received the shameful no pranking from me till date. So let's not pull the linguistic chauvinism card now, shall we? But I digress. Let's get back to that. Plot synopsis. Minnie, a college student and her family, the Sharmas, move into their new home only to have a supernatural entity that haunts the home slowly take over Minnie and destroy her and her family in the process. I would like to say that this is nothing groundbreaking, but that would be literally incorrect, as Raat is often touted as one of the first mainstream Indian horror movies. So yeah, it was groundbreaking, at least for its time. Let's start with the positives. The horror sequences in Raat, when they actually do happen, are glorious to behold. And it's not some mindless sequence of silly jump scares either. These are well directed, well shot, well edited sequences brimming with tension, anxiety and apprehension, usually climaxing in some sort of grand crescendo. Despite being your typical haunted house film, the horror of the film always remains fresh as well, with these sequences transpiring in ways and settings that are quite different from what the premise might imply. And some of this horror is even unique and relevant to this day. There is a sequence in an empty movie theater strangely capturing the essence of the liminal horror niche, even 30 years before it gained some semblance of popularity. And the opening scene of Minnie being trapped in a town being chased by an unknown entity. There is something so visceral and frightening about this primal experience, almost like a nightmare that has happened to us at some point of time, which Ram Gopal Verma has managed to capture so effectively. And speaking of capturing effectively, the movie is shot with a certain sense of dynamism that is not even seen in modern cinema. There are a ton of steadicam shots putting you effectively in the perspective of the entity hunting down our protagonist, and there are always reaction shots but never any reverse shots, further enhancing the horror of the unseeable and unknowable entity. There are also the seemingly handheld shots, one-ers, Dutch angles, along with some good practical effect shots and one particular VFX shot towards the end that combines practical effects with its VFX. Doing all of this for a simple horror movie would be considered a bit too much even now, but they did it in 1992 and managed to pull off most of it. And the technical brilliance doesn't quite end there with the visuals alone. It extends with the audio as well, with some harsh but effective sound effects and some expertly crafted soundscape featuring minimalistic ambient music for most of the film, creating this morbidly realistic atmosphere of dread. But the real star of the show is not just the technical aspects of the film, but the actual stars of the show, the performances that truly elevate the film, especially Revathi as the leading lady Minnie, who switches between friendly neighborhood college girl and a horrifying victim of demonic possession effortlessly in a blink of an eye. And just like Shobana in Manchitra, her performance is so natural and realistic without even a hint of melodrama or overacting during these sequences that it's almost scary to believe that it is the same actor who is pulling off both the roles. And let's not forget other films of its ilk, especially something like The Exorcist, which the film is liberally borrowing from, used extensive prosthetics and makeup to make the demonic presence seem real. Here, all Revathi needed were some contact lenses. It's one of the most realistic representations of demonic possessions on screen, even today in my opinion, chiefly thanks to how understated, subtle and minimal it is in its presentation. No bodily fluids or contortions jumping around on the walls or ceiling or anything, just a performance which is so creepy and unnerving that it slides into the realm of supernatural with minimum flashiness. Oh, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there are no flashy, exciting sequences in this film. This film has one of the best neck-snapping sequences put in Indian cinema, but I think it's best experienced firsthand, so I won't spoil anything for you. And it's not just Revathi's performance that makes this film great. All the supporting characters do excellent work as well, especially with a short but exceptionally memorable performance by the man, the myth, the legend, Om Puri towards the end of the film. That's a lot of positive. So why the long face then? Well, for starters, and let's be real, this is not a very original film now, is it? Audiences at that time, except maybe not the cinephiles, would have been lost on how the film borrows from films like The Exorcist, Pet Sematary, etc. But as of now, in the post-internet phase, it's pretty obvious that RGV is not exactly the most original filmmaker around. You know what? I can let that slide. Regardless of how original the film might be, the horror when it hits, it does hit, as I explained. And yeah, that's the thing, when it hits. See, if you ask me, the biggest problem with the film is the downtime between the horror sequences, especially in the first half. Almost nothing of interest happens between the scares. The characters go around doing boring shit. They go to college, they go for ice cream, they go to a park. Sure, at least some of these are setups to horror sequences, but my god, they didn't have to be this boring and padded out. Obviously, I'm not asking for a relentless sequence of scares that would take away from the experience by making us numb to the horror, but what I am asking for is anything compelling between the scares. And like I mentioned earlier, I actually commend the film for playing it straight and being devoid of humor or quips that could take away from the horror vibes, but there should be some form of interesting drama to keep me engaged. Case in point, there is this entire sequence of Minnie and her boyfriend going to the park to celebrate his birthday, and it's just scenes of them on the bike commuting, sitting in the park, having ice cream. I didn't need to see any of this. In fact, a whole lot of this pointless and needless padding could have been cut out and the film would have been better for it. I'm sure of the fact that the film had a much longer and much padded out original cut which they had to trim out to a reasonable time, but in this process they might have butchered the edit, and as a result we get a movie where the first half is padded out to oblivion. Meanwhile, the second half and especially the last 30 minutes of the movie seem rushed and cluttered. We'll get to the second half in a bit, don't you worry about that, but this raises a question. Why didn't I make the same fuss for movies like Bhutakalam or Manchitra, where the horror barely rears its head until it's the second half? Well, that's because these films were damn entertaining even despite the horror. Entertaining things happen in these films even in its downtime. It's not like the characters are going about their daily life doing boring stuff. But yeah, that being said, here's the contradiction even with that statement. I could watch the characters of Manichittatharu, Bhutakalam, Tumbad, Amis, The Wailing, Norai or any of the other favorite films just stand in a blank room and have a conversation simply because they are interesting characters to begin with. The lead Minnie from Raat is not an interesting character one bit. She feels like a side character in her own film. She is charming like most attractive women of her age, but beyond that there is nothing to her. Ask me about any of the leads of other horror films I mentioned and I can write a mini essay about them, but with Minnie all I can say is she is just a generic young woman. Fine, she's not an interesting character. There are a lot of horror films where the lead character is not the most interesting person in the world and almost a blank slate. But in these films, the leads are put in interesting situations to begin with, not just going out and having ice cream for 10 minutes. This is also not helped by the performance of Revathi as well. Wait, how does that work out when I praised the demonic performance for 2 minutes previously? You see, dear viewer, unlike most horror films with a demonic lead, where the performance is ruined due to overacting from the demonic side of the character, strangely enough, here the character is somewhat ruined because Minnie, pre-demonic possession, while likable, borders on cringe and melodramatic. As is typical with Bollywood leading lady performances at the time, she is too animated and cutesy for this movie. And the blame is not on Revathi. This was clearly a directorial choice to enhance the distinction between the demonic and non-demonic performances, but as it stands, it went a bit overboard in my opinion and ruins the character of Minnie. And speaking of characters, the rest of the characters of the film, the Sharmas and Minnie's friend circle, despite being delivered with nuanced performances by good actors at the helm, are not even remotely remarkable. And that is until we get to the last 20 minutes, we are introduced to the character of Tantrik, who is probably one of the most enigmatic and simultaneously charismatic characters in the film. But unfortunately, the film screws up this character as well for absolutely no reason, as he gets barely any screen time to fully shine thanks to the film rushing to a conclusion by the last 20 minutes. Looking at something like The Exorcist or Manisadathare, the problem solver character Father Merrin or Dr. Sunny arrives at almost the halfway mark of the film. The film knows they are the most compelling characters in the script and treats them with the gravitas and importance that they deserve, but in Raat, the audience barely gets to experience 15 minutes of Om Puri's aura while we spend ample time with the vanilla girl as she hangs out at her friend's place. God, this pisses me off. Not only is this character rush, the story behind the actual entity, as well as some other cool stuff like the whole underground section of the home, the weird one-eyed guy, all of this are glossed over. So much wasted potential. You know what, just thinking of the mistakes and the wasted potential of this film gets me pissed off. What makes me more pissed off is how thoroughly this film came in recommended to me, only to leave me disappointed by an equally thorough degree. Raat may be important, Raat may be influential, Raat is technically impressive as well, especially for his time, but great, not for me. Overrated tier. Now hold on to your pitchforks for a second. All that being said, Raat, despite its negatives, is still a very unique horror experience. Unlike most modern horror cinema, it is not trying to keep you on your tippy toes non-stop and presents you with the most normal, borderline boring family in cinema encountering something paranormal, and you are a witness and a bystander as it unfolds, no matter how much of a drag it is. Take it or leave it. Look, I know the film has its die-hard fan base and this is one of the most recommended films on this list, but I am not one of the fans and I am not recommending this film. Watch the film if you must. It's an important milestone for Indian horror cinema, but according to me, it does not hold up, as some may have falsely recommended, blinded by their nostalgia and rosy retrospection. I know a lot of you would rightfully disagree with me, but I stand by my ranking. If you disagree with anything I have told so far, convince me in the comments. Now on to the next film.